most glamorous women in France smelled so bad, people fainted just standing near them. I mean, Versailles looked like a dream. Gold, silk, and chandeliers everywhere. But here's the crazy part. Behind all that beauty, royal women lived with hygiene habits that'll honestly disgust you. Let me tell you, this part absolutely blew my mind. You'd think royalty, with their gold-plated halls and diamond necklaces, would be the cleanest people around. But nope. When it came to bathing, royal women avoided water like it was poison. Back in the 17th century in France, doctors actually believed warm water was dangerous. They swore it opened your pores and made you vulnerable to every disease floating in the air. And the church, they doubled down, declaring baths sinful dens of vanity and temptation. So the message to noble women was clear: stay dry, stay pure. So how did they keep clean? Forget soap and hot water. Most women just took a cloth, dipped it in alcohol, vinegar, or even saliva, and wiped their face, hands, and maybe their neck. That was it. Imagine covering yourself in layers of perfume, silks, powders, and jewels, but underneath, your skin hasn't seen a real wash in months. That's the reality. And on the rare occasion when they did take a bath, it wasn't glamorous either. It was communal. Picture one tub of water shared by the entire family. Men always went first, soaking in fresh water. By the time women got their turn, the water was lukewarm, cloudy, and filled with residue from everyone before them. Honestly, it was less a bath and more a dip in someone else's leftovers. The effect on the palace? Visitors couldn't stop writing about it. Versailles may have looked like a dream, but it smelled like a nightmare. They described a strange mix of old perfume, sweat, damp fabrics, animal fat, and mildew drifting through the gilded corridors. It was so strong it could knock the freshness right out of a bouquet of roses. The cruel irony was brutal. These women were icons of beauty from a distance, powdered, jeweled, and admired like living dolls. But up close, the stench gave everything away. Imagine standing near a duchess who looked perfect in portraits, but whose skin reeked because it hadn't touched soap in half a year. Now I'll ask you this: would you rather live in a palace dripping with gold but never bathe, or live modestly with the luxury of a hot shower every day? But wait, it's about to get way more shocking, because Versailles, this so-called jewel of European luxury, had almost no proper toilets. You'd expect marble bathrooms, golden basins, the works, right? Nope. What they had were chamber pots, little bowls tucked under beds, behind curtains, or hidden in closets. When nature called, you used your pot, and then someone, maybe a servant, maybe even you, tossed the contents straight out the window. Picture this: you're walking through the gardens in your best gown, and suddenly a splash falls from above. If the wind shifted wrong, you'd be wearing someone else's waist. And it wasn't rare, it was constant. Men would even urinate off balconies. Some courtiers didn't bother with pots at all, treating the palace corridors like a bathroom. It got so bad that by 1715, the king had to issue a decree ordering the hallways to be cleaned once a week. Not daily, once a week. And that was considered an improvement. And don't even think about toilet paper. That wasn't around. They used scraps of cloth, straw, leaves, or in desperate moments, their bare hands. And washing afterward? Minimal, if at all. So imagine walking the Versailles halls as a woman in a massive silk gown. You're gliding through with elegance, but secretly, you're lifting your skirts, not for fashion, but to dodge piles of human waste on the floor. The smell? It mixed with perfumes and sweat until the whole palace reeked of filth. No wonder parasites spread like wildfire. Seriously, would you call that luxury? Or a nightmare disguised in gold?
I usually wear this hairstyle with a beret, and then you can't see that it is messy or that there are bobby pins.
And just when you thought the bathing and toilet habits were the worst of it, let's talk about hair. Or should I say monuments on top of women's heads. Royal wigs weren't hairstyles, they were architecture. These things towered feet above the head, decorated with ribbons, pearls, and even tiny replicas of ships riding on powdered curls. Imagine walking into a ballroom and seeing a literal battleship sailing on someone's scalp. That's how over the top it got. But building these masterpieces came with a nasty cost. To give the wig's shape, women used wire frames, stuffed them with horsehair or wool, and slathered on pomade made from animal fat. Yes, beef tallow, grease that glued everything together, but also created the perfect breeding ground for lice. And lice weren't just occasional, they were expected. Whole colonies lived inside those wigs. Women carried long silver louse claws, dainty little scratching tools, so they could reach under the curls without ruining their style. Picture this. You're at a royal dinner, wine glass in hand, casually scratching your scalp while still pretending to be glamorous. The discomfort was insane. Some wigs were so heavy that they caused chronic neck pain. Others literally caught fire if you leaned too close to a candle. Yet no woman dared to go without one. Why? Because at Versailles, appearance wasn't just vanity, it was power. Fall behind in fashion, and you could lose your place at court. Poor women didn't have to bother with this circus. They shaved their heads clean to avoid lice altogether. But for the noble ladies, their crowns weren't optional. Even if it hid an ecosystem of insects underneath, the show had to go on. Now tell me, would you rather wear a towering wig full of lice or shave your head bald like the peasants? If wigs weren't bad enough, the food situation might make your stomach turn. Versailles is famous for its lavish banquets, tables bending under the weight of roasted pheasants, meat pies, sugared fruits. It looks like paradise on silver platters, but behind that glittering display, absolute filth. The palace plumbing was a disaster. Raw sewage often leaked back into the kitchens. There's even a record of wastewater reaching Marie Antoinette's private kitchen. Imagine preparing pastries while the stench of sewage filled the room. Refrigeration didn't exist, ventilation was terrible, and food often sat out for days. Meat spoiled quickly, fruits rotted, and pests had free rein. Rats, insects, and contamination were part of daily life. And yet the cooks had no choice. They had to keep serving. The result? A whole court is constantly battling stomach issues. Diarrhea, vomiting, infections, you name it. Worst of all, parasites thrived. Undercooked meat meant tapeworms, sometimes growing feet long inside the intestines. Even Louis XIV himself wasn't spared. Historical accounts say he once passed a 6-inch tapeworm. Picture the most powerful man in Europe, humbled by a parasite. For royal women, the nightmare was doubled. They weren't just eating, they were performing. At banquets, women had to sit with perfect posture, laugh at jokes, flirt across the table, all while quietly fighting cramps or nausea from tainted food. You couldn't grimace or show discomfort. Imagine smiling with a goblet of wine while worms writhed in your stomach. And that's what makes this part so twisted. The banquets looked like fairy tales, but the reality was a stomach-churning performance of survival. So I've got to ask you, if you were at that table, would you dare take a bite? And here's the part that I think was the cruelest of all: childbirth. For royal women, giving birth wasn't private. It wasn't even intimate. It was a public spectacle. The delivery room would be filled with courtiers, priests, nobles, and even random observers. Imagine being in excruciating pain and instead of comfort, you're surrounded by a crowd staring at you like it's a theater show. Why? Because people feared scandal. They thought a stillborn child or a baby girl might be secretly swapped for a healthy male heir. The only way to prove legitimacy was to have witnesses. So these women gave birth under surveillance. Take Marie Antoinette. Her chamber was so packed during labor that the heat became unbearable. She fainted right after giving birth, collapsing under the weight of exhaustion and suffocation from the crowd. And she wasn't alone. Many royal women fainted, screamed, or suffered severe complications while being watched like performers on a stage. And if the emotional toll wasn't brutal enough, the medical reality was terrifying. 1 in 3 children died before the age of 3. Mothers were constantly at risk too. Doctors and midwives used unwashed hands and unsterile tools. Infections were common, antibiotics didn't exist. A small wound, a bit of retained placenta, or fever after birth could mean death. So these women carried a double burden: immense physical pain, yes, but also the crushing mental pressure of knowing the whole nation was waiting for them to deliver a male heir. Grace on the outside, trauma on the inside. It wasn't just childbirth. It was survival under the cruel gaze of tradition and politics. So there it is, the glittering masks of Versailles hiding a life of filth, disease, and suffering. Royal women looked like queens in silk and jewels, but underneath, they endured misery for the sake of elegance. History wasn't glamorous, it was raw, cruel, and painfully human.